Hi, it's Justin from CanadaWhips.com. In today's video, we're going to talk about whip crackers. The cracker is the piece of string at the end of the whip that surpasses the sound barrier and travels fast enough to make a miniature sonic boom. Because crackers travel so fast through the air, they can start to degrade over time and they need to be replaced fairly regularly. If you don't replace them, it puts unnecessary strain on your whip, it can damage it, and ultimately it's going to mean you're not getting the cracks as nice as you could be. So in this video, we're going to talk about how to know when your cracker needs to be replaced. Let's get started. We're going to start with an example that's a little bit obvious, but if your whip is like this one, meaning it doesn't have a cracker, then it's probably a good time to put a cracker on your whip or replace the cracker that was on it. This can happen sometimes if you're cracking really hard or your cracker isn't tied on properly or just not tied on tight enough. The cracker will fly off and then you'll be left with a fall that just doesn't have a cracker at all. So if your whip looks like that, you should probably put a cracker on it. These crackers both have knots in them. This cracker has a little bit of a knot in the twist here, and then this cracker has a pretty big knot up here in the twist as well. If your cracker knots, it's important to try and untie it as soon as possible, because if you keep cracking the whip after the cracker is knotted, it's going to be very hard to untie it. The knots just get tighter and tighter with each crack. And if your cracker has knots like this, it's going to mean that the cracker isn't going to crack very well. For a cracker like this, with a relatively small knot, I might crack this for the time being, just until I have a moment to replace it. I'm not too worried about a knot like that, but ideally you would replace it as soon as you're able. For a bigger knot like this, if I'm unable to untie it, I would probably replace this cracker pretty much right away. It can affect the flow of the whip and the cracker. It can put unnecessary strain on the end of your fall, and so probably I would try and replace this as soon as I'm done whatever routine that I'm working on. This cracker also has a knot in the fray of the cracker. And these knots are very hard to untie, so if a knot like this happens, you're probably going to replace your cracker right away. Otherwise, when you crack this whip, this knot could end up breaking, and then you're going to have a significantly shorter fray, and then your cracker isn't going to displace energy properly, and it's just not going to work well. This cracker also has a pretty big knot in the fray, and you can tell that at the end of the cracker here, this bit's pretty short, kind of messy. It's not going to crack very well. This knot is going to put some strain on the whip, and it's also probably going to break and leave a very short fray at the end of the cracker, which isn't good. So I would replace this cracker right away as well. This knot is super tight. It formed and then it got cracked a bunch, and now it's pretty much impossible for me to untie, so I have to say goodbye to this cracker. So as you can see here, the end of this cracker is pretty small. It's degraded a fair bit from lots of use, and it's not really a nice shape. It's also pretty short. So this is my regular cracker here, and you can see the difference in the length. This one's about half the length of that one. There's also a pretty big knot here, which I'm just going to ignore. If we're going to pretend that's not there, I would still replace this cracker. And the reason is A, there's no fray, and B, the shape of the fray isn't very nice. On a fresh cracker, all of these strands are more or less the same size, and that's going to help the whip disperse the energy really nicely and evenly when the whip cracks. A cracker like this, with all these different fray lengths, it's just not going to disperse energy as nicely. The cracks aren't going to sound as nice or as crisp, and really it's just not very satisfying to use. As well, because the fray is so short, you're putting a lot of strain on the end of your whip, and so this cracker probably should be replaced too. This cracker is horrible. I left this on my whip specifically to show you what will happen if you keep cracking a whip over and over and over when you should replace the cracker. You can see the fray is pretty much almost gone. In fact, what happened is a knot formed and then it broke, and it just left me with this little tiny tuft of fray. It doesn't crack nicely at all. It's also incredibly short because the exact same thing happened in the twisted section. This was actually a knot that had formed, and then when the cracker broke, it just turned into a mini cracker, and it really doesn't crack well. I should have replaced this a long time ago. So if your cracker looks like this, definitely get a new one on there because your whip will thank you for it. These four crackers show various levels of use from a new cracker. This is a brand new cracker that I twisted before this video. You can see the strings on the end haven't frayed at all. They're all the same length. It's fresh, it's ready to be put on a whip that needs a cracker replacement. This second whip has been used a little bit. I've cracked it a few times. You can tell that the strings have started fraying just a bit, They're still nice and even, and this whip is also still good to go for a long time. This cracker has had a fair bit more use, so it's nice and frayed at the end. All the strands are still all the same length. It's going to disperse energy really nicely, and I definitely wouldn't replace this one until it needs to be replaced. And then this one as well is a bit older. It's had a lot more use. You can tell that it's a little bit dirtier. It's starting to go brown and green from hitting the grass and the dirt. As well, it's really frayed, and so there are some strands here and there that are a little bit short. But for the most part, this cracker still cracks really well, and I'm going to keep using it until a knot forms or until one of the other problems that we talked about in this video happens. So if your cracker looks like any of these, you're good to go. Keep cracking, and as soon as you get a knot or something else, then maybe consider changing it. But for the time being, these are awesome. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. If you want to learn more about whips and whip cracking, check out our website at canadawhips.com.